I'm covering Quitting Cannabis 1 to 6 sessions, which was, what I'm going to outline is very quickly some stats and just introduce you to ncpic for some of those who haven't necessarily logged onto our website or don't know about us, but I think that we pretty much know now. Just give you some background very, very briefly and describe the Quitting Cannabis 1 to 6 sessions, and then we'll do part 1 of the 4 series. I'm not sure whether I have to stress this, but cannabis is the most widely used illicit substance in the world and in Australia. And the last data survey that was done in 2003 suggests that over 2 million Australians have reported that they had used the drug in the previous 12 months. So it is a very commonly used drug. As I said, it is the most commonly used illicit drug and comes 3 after alcohol and tobacco. Just to give you a breakdown of ever used and recent use. Now, ever used is ever used, as it suggests, and recent use is basically over the last 12 months. And as you can see, they are the stats. Now, the interesting thing that we've just found is that the largest growing age group is 60 plus. So you can all speculate as to why that might be. I won't dwell on that any longer. But in terms of daily users, the largest group of daily users are 40-year-old males. So our mission is really, in response to this, is that the Australian government some 2 terms ago established the centre. It just keeps moving by itself, people, so I'll go back. We got funding for 4 years, and then we got another round of funding. We are now awaiting further funding. We have been given 12 months, so at least we're here until next year, until June of next year, so let's hope we get funding after that. But our mission really is to reduce the use of cannabis and problems related to cannabis use in Australia. So our goal is to provide both the community with evidence-based information as well as building capacity for service providers such as yourselves that respond to cannabis users and their families. We are trying to be really a one-stop shop for everyone in terms of our website. So we are an evidence-based centre. We are neither entirely harm minimisation or abstinence-based. We simply report what the research literature says and what the evidence says. That is our job. So having said that, this is our new website. For those of you who are familiar with us, I just need to make you aware that we have a new look, and this is what it looks like. I know that some people find it hard to log on, and if you do find it hard to log on, that's because we've changed a few things. So please let us know if you have difficulty. So we have a depth of information on our website. As I said, we are trying to be a one-stop shop, and hopefully now it is much easier to navigate. Maybe some of you are familiar with our resources. We have an amazing array of resources that are available to you for anyone that you can think of. Our fact sheets, our competitions, our self-help books. We have a web-based intervention. We have a self-help intervention. We have a telephone line intervention. And at the moment, we're trying to develop a phone app that hopefully might be available sometime soon. So please log on. I just want to make you aware of our clinical guidelines. This was something that we developed when we first started. We looked at all the evidence in relation to cannabis and put it all together in this book. And as you can see, the log on for you to get that book is there in front of you, I hope. That's the link for you to download it. There's 12 chapters, one on what does the evidence say about what the best screening tool is, what does the evidence say about what the best assessment is, what does the evidence say about what the best treatment is. And it's all there for you with references at the end of each chapter. And the last two chapters I think you will find particularly useful because they are questionnaires and they are some handouts for you to give to your clients that I think you will find very, very helpful. So have a look at those whenever you've got time if cannabis is something that you need to attend to with your clients. All right, let's move on to quitting cannabis 1 to 6 sessions. Now, this was based on a randomised controlled trial that was run some time ago now. And if you're interested at all, I think Dion has sent you this journal article, so you can read that in your own time, and it will describe for you exactly what we did in our trial. Now, I have been disseminating this. This has been my main job, and we've been disseminating this through workshops that we run. But now we're doing this through, obviously, this webinar series so that, we can, I guess, interact with people who may perhaps be in rural or regional areas that can't necessarily come to one of our workshops. So have a look at that article that Dion has sent you. Again, if you want to look at the nuts and bolts of it all, you can look at the technical report, and this is where you can find the link. It's on the NDARC website, so if you want further details on it, you can get that technical report. Here are some references that are also attached to this workshop. Okay, now, again, 4 weeks, I'll be covering the quitting cannabis 1 to 6 sessions. Now, I just really want to outline the learning outcomes. I hope to provide listeners who treat individuals presenting with cannabis use disorder with a brief and efficacious intervention and talk you through some of the material that's related to the delivery of this particular intervention. And my objectives are that at the end of the 4 weeks, that you will be familiar with this intervention and that you will be familiar with the resources, which include the severity of dependence. And I just want to say that you can download that severity of dependence, the high-risk confidence questionnaire, and the cannabis problems questionnaire off our website directly if you want to do that independently of delivering the quitting cannabis 1 to 6 sessions. Again, I think it's a good idea to point out that these are 2 books, reference books that you may want to get a hold of. The 3rd edition of Motivational Interviewing by Bill Miller, and the Treatment Approaches for Drug and Alcohol Dependence, which was done out of NDARC some years ago, and they are absolutely still relevant today. All right, why are we suggesting that this is a good intervention or why you might want to use this particular intervention? Well, it's standardized. You don't need to organize anything. We have all the material readily available for you. We've done the research that showed that there was a reduction in cannabis-related harms and cannabis use. As I said, the material is there for you to order online, and it will increase the chances of affecting change. And that, I guess, is the most important thing and why we are in the business that we're in, that is treating people who have got problems related to one substance or another, but in this case, cannabis. Now, the first thing that you, I guess, need to do is assess a person's use, and there are various things that you can, various interventions that you can decide depending on their level of readiness and depending on the problems related to their cannabis use. And we have 3 here that we deliver as workshops. There's our very brief intervention, which is about 30 minutes long. There's our ACCU, that's primarily for non-treatment seekers. And then, of course, there's our, what we're doing today is quitting cannabis 1 to 6 sessions, which is primarily for treatment-seeking clients. This is who we had in our trial. We put an ad in the paper in relation to cannabis use, and if anybody wanted to reduce or stop their cannabis use, and these are the people who came and who were involved in our randomised controlled trial. So I just want to stress the point that this is for treatment-seeking clients, whereas the ACCU is for non-treatment-seeking clients. Okay, so let us move on and meet our client that I will be using to demonstrate the delivery of this intervention. So this is Tony. I chose Tony because he was typical of our subjects when we did the trial. So what I want to tell you about Tony is he's a 30-year-old male. He works in a real estate agency in the accounts department and has done so for the last 2 years. He's been married for 5 years and he has 2 small children. Tony had a car accident and he went to hospital and was tested positive for cannabis. Now, just for a little bit of levity, while I am on driving, I just want to point out that we run campaigns practically every year on Driving Stoned. I think this is one of our campaigns that we did. We also have fact sheets and flyers that I would recommend that you have in your waiting rooms as to inform the public on the dangers of driving stoned. But now, as I said, for some levity, I want to show you something that I guess a very inventive New Zealand government put out there in the public domain to highlight driving stoned, which I think was really quite fun and an interesting view. I hope you enjoyed as much as we did. I really thought that this was extremely progressive of the New Zealand government, and my hats go off to them. It's called Blazon. Some of you may have already seen it, so cue the video. Thank you.
When this car's finished, me and my dad will just cruise around being all scucks and doing mean-ass burnouts.
Bro, my dad invented burnouts.
He invented skiddies, more like it.
Not. My dad's the bestest driver, even when he's been blazing.
My dad invented blazing.
My dad gets the blazedest.
When my dad's blazed, he drives smooth as like this.
Nah, move over, bro. My dad's been blazing, he drives like this.
Nah, bro, like this.
Nah, bro, like this.
What street do I live on again?
Hey, this ain't my car. Check out this cheeky fella. Looks just like me.
I love this music.
What music?
I'm going 5 k's an hour! It's too fast! It's too fast! Take the wheel, bro! I'm freaking out! Light's green, bro.
Oh, yeah.
Everything's so interesting.
Ooh.
Nah, bro, you're both wrong. My dad blazes and you drives like this. Boom, boom. And then there's missiles following my dad, and then it was keep dodging them all of the tigers, and then my dad had some burgers in there, and there was heaps of burgers, and that far there was heaps, man. I mean, there was heaps of bananas, and the monkeys came and had some bananas, and then my dad went off home, he had some fish and chips.
Oh, I'm off. Sure. Catch you later.
Later.
All right, back to Tony. Now, Tony's having difficulty coming in on Monday mornings to work. His boss has brought this to his attention on a few occasions over the past couple of years. Tony's rung the ncpic helpline and they suggested that he see someone. So Tony has now come in to see you, particularly in view of A, work, and B, that he was caught with cannabis in his system. He called and made an appointment. He was assessed by you, and yes, you realised that he had some problematic use. So Tony started at the age of 15. He started smoking cannabis, and by 20, he was smoking every day. By the age of 20, he was a daily cannabis user. How much does he smoke? He smokes about 2 to 3 cones a day. Right. So 5 years ago, he switched to joints when he got married, and he seems to smoke more on a weekend than during the week. It took him kind of 5 years to finish his certificate and has been employed, as I said, for the last 2 years. Unlucky, car accident, blood tested, positive, now seeking treatment. And his pattern of use, more specifically, is as it is there. 1 joint on arriving home, which is equivalent to 3 cones. And while I'm on that, just in terms of some background information, I think it's important to kind of put that in some perspective in terms of lung damage or smoke damage into the lungs. And just so that you know, 1 joint is equivalent to smoking 3 cones, which is equivalent to smoking 5 cigarettes in terms of tar and carbon monoxide. So that's kind of give you a little bit of background to get some idea of how damaging it is. Not to mention the fact that when people do smoke, they hold on to the smoke in their lungs. So if you want to take a harm minimisation kind of stance, it's really good to kind of deal with that issue. So 1 joint on arriving home, 1 joint before he goes to bed, sometimes 1 in the morning, depending on how he's feeling. And so on average of 6 to 9 cones per day, and then on the weekends he might, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, smoke a bit more than that. So you have seen him, you have said, you've assessed him and you've said, look, I've got this intervention that's called Quitting Cannabis, 1 to 6 sessions, and, you know, are you interested in coming to that? Over 6 sessions, you and I will look at various things and go over various things in the hope of reducing or perhaps stopping, depending on what you want to do, your cannabis use. Yes, I'd love to do that because he is treatment seeking, remember, and so you make a further appointment, or you can continue with the Quitting Cannabis 1 to 6 sessions within that first session. I mean, I'm not sure how you operate or how your system is at work, but you can do 1 of 2 things depending on time. So what you then do is you introduce him to the booklet, which again, I can assume that Dion has sent you and you have a copy of, because it's important for us to refer to that book, both their book and your clinician's guide that talks you through the various steps. And while I'm talking about the clinician's guide, this is not about being prescriptive. This is simply you know, the systematic way in which we delivered the intervention. Now, it's up to you whether you want to follow that or whether you want to change that. Really, it's entirely up to you. But I am going to be covering it in the way it was delivered. So again, you're free to do whatever you like in terms of the order in which you want to do things. So the key points really within the first session are to introduce the booklet, to stress the fact that homework is a necessary part of this intervention, to stress that this is a collaborative, I suppose, intervention where both parties are equal and he can, you know, decide that, you know, he doesn't want to do this and you'll find a middle ground. And so this is a collaborative intervention where both of you decide to do or to proceed in a particular way that is helpful to the client. You will also explain the way in which, or the content or the theory behind this intervention, which is based on cognitive behaviour therapy, and explain what that actually means so that they understand it. Discuss dependence. Again, there is some misinformation out there still that cannabis is not a drug of dependence, which we now know, of course, it is. And so you discuss dependence, and I'll talk a bit about that soon. You administer the 3 questionnaires, which is the SDS, the CPQ, which stands for Cannabis Problems Questionnaire, and the HRC, which stands for High Risk Confidence Scale. And again, I'm sure Dion has sent those to you, and they've been filled out as though Tony has filled them out. You will then give feedback on the score of the SDS and discuss that, and then you will raise the notion of whether he wants to quit or whether he wants to reduce. So you need for him to commit, preferably to a date. That would really be helpful so that you've got something to work towards. But you know, if a person's not ready, and by the by, we did have people in our randomised control trial that did the whole 6 sessions without actually committing to a quit date. But not many of those, I have to say. But the earlier you can commit a client to a change date, as we called it, the better off you are, because then you're working towards something. So that's what you would really cover within the first session or 60 minutes that you have. All right, so you need to highlight the various sections of the book. So that's the first thing you do, and I'll now go through each of these in detail. As you know, this is what the book looks like. And as I said to you, each section does not necessarily coincide with the sessions, right? So even though they're numbered 1 to 6, you may cover 2 sections of the book in 1 session. So again, I just want you to be mindful that the sessions don't necessarily coincide with the sections of the book, but they are in a logical order. So, and again, I just want to say that if you can get a minimum of 6 sessions with a client, if you can get a minimum of 3 sessions with a client, that would be really highly recommended. Ideally 6, but generally people will come to 3 or 4. So how fast you will go through the book or the sessions really does depend on the client and the client's level of readiness, or whether or not they're ambivalent. And you'll know that within the first couple of weeks. So some people need more time, some people are ready right then and there. So how many sessions really needs to be negotiated with their level of readiness. But you'll pick that up fairly quickly, I would think. So these are the various sections of the book, and as I said, they don't all coincide with the sessions. The first one is Cannabis and You, and as I said, you will describe the various components of the book. You highlight that cannabis is a drug of dependence, and you identify their level of dependence. This section discusses cannabis in general, as well as describing dependence. It contains the SDS, and you'll ask the client to fill it out, but we'll do that in a second. The second section is preparing for change. The aim is to assess the level of motivation, is to identify problems, is to identify difficult situations that they find hard not to smoke in. And these will be described obviously in more detail as we go through the weeks. So this section is called Preparing for Change and focuses on why people smoke and why people wish to stop or reduce. And I guess it's commonly known as the decisional balance, the pros and cons of smoking, the pros and cons of not smoking. It also describes and explains situations where the person usually smokes. The third section is it's called Strategies for Change, and really this is about developing some strategies this is what you will do when you get to that. The section elaborates the strategies needed for change and helps to develop an emergency plan. You discuss urges and cravings, and you remind the client to be mindful during this period of change. The next section is talking about withdrawal, and really the aim is to educate the client in relation to withdrawal and be prepared for the withdrawal process and manage that withdrawal. The section is, as the title suggests, it includes a monitoring sheet which the client will fill out when they get to that section. And then the fifth is about putting it all together. Really, it's just a summary of what needs to happen to be successful. That you need a commitment, you need a change date to commit to, you need to prepare mentally, you need to be mindful, not to make excuses, and keep moving that change date, reminding a person to be mindful by reviewing their progress and using the monitor sheets that we will talk about in a second, that monitor thoughts and behaviour. And this includes, as I said just now, the daily monitoring sheet which client needs to fill out, and you will talk them through how to do that and describe. And I will describe later how to do that if you're not familiar with it already. And then it talks about ensuring positive rewards for their effort. It's the carrot and the stick stuff. You know, people will engage in behaviour that has positive rewards, and you will highlight that this needs to be a positive experience. And then finally we have the section on relapse prevention, which is extremely important to raise because people should know that this may happen and that they shouldn't beat themselves up over it because behaviour change is difficult. It also has the emergency plan in there. So after you've described all the sections of the book and what they contain, relapse prevention is what that's all about. You will stress the fact that they do have to do some homework. In other words, you know, they have to perhaps fill out some questionnaires or read 2 or 3 pages of the book or review what you've been talking about during your session. So they do need to have some input over and above just coming to sessions with you. They do need to put a little bit more effort into reading and doing a few things. Now, as I said, you need to stress that this is a collaborative experience and define what CBT is because it's important for them to understand that this endeavour towards change is a collaborative effort on your part and their part. It's not about what you think or what you know, but it is about the client's needs and their wants and what they're prepared to do. And, you know, what is acceptable within reason in terms of cutting down or quitting. So it's negotiated. And that any time that they don't agree with something, it really is up for discussion and negotiation. We as clinicians need to be guided by them to some extent. You'll then go on to describe the type of intervention, and that is describing what CBT actually is. And this is a definition of what CBT is. And as the theory suggests, it's our cognitions or our beliefs, the way we think and feel, that has a direct impact on how we behave and what we do. And it is important for clients to understand that we have to change our thinking in order to change that behaviour. So I think spending 5 minutes describing what CBT is and how it will actually change the behaviour is important for them to kind of understand. So the emphasis is on skills training and how to respond, you know, to the desire to smoke and so on. So when they kind of get it, it would be great. It's the type of therapy that helps people change unhelpful or unhealthy thinking habits in order to change what we consider maladaptive behaviour. So then you would move on to describing dependence. People need to, I guess, get a definition of what dependence is. And if you are familiar with motivational interviewing, it is about asking a question. Do you know what I mean by dependence, Tony? You know, can you describe for me what you think dependence is? This is just a clinical definition for clinicians. It's a maladaptive pattern of substance use leading to clinically significant impairment or distress. Well, you know, that's our speak, but you know, Tony needs to have an understanding of what dependence is and what it actually means. So you would ask, do you know what I mean when I use the word dependence? You know, can you give me your understanding of the term dependence? And you go on to explain the term in relation to tolerance and withdrawal, because in the clinical world, this is the criteria for dependence, and this is how we measure dependence through tolerance and withdrawal, and the other points that I have there on that slide. And this is a combination of WHO's definition and the DSM's definition of what dependence is. All right. So obviously, the more a person smokes, the greater the risk that they will become dependent. So you need to highlight that fact. And you also may want to highlight the prevalence among those who try cannabis. And you may want to put it in context. And so I think it's a good idea to download the latest data and feed that back to your clients. You know, normative data that is available now, and this is an example of his age group. That's the latest data that we have in terms of the household survey that was done most recently. Now, as you can see, what you would do is, as you can see there, 51% of 30-year-olds have ever used, 12% used in the last year. And of those who used in the last year, of those 12%, 20% use once a week, and of the 12, 9% of the 12 use once a month. So in terms of Tony, you know, only 11% of those who used in the last year use every day. So it puts some context around him versus the rest of the population. And we also have some stats on tobacco and alcohol. And I don't know, we found actually when we looked at this in isolation to everything else, is feeding back normative data to a person, that it actually was important for them to know where they stood, because everyone assumes things that aren't necessarily true about their behaviour and how that compares to everyone else's. So again, that's something that you might want to utilise just to stress the point or to educate the client about their cannabis use. Okay, so what I might do actually, let's go back to this slide. What I might do at this point is to show you a video of how you might introduce the next section, which is the SDS, that looks at dependence and uses the SDS and prefaces the SDS by a discussion or a question, I suspect. Now, I just want you, we used this in our last webinar series when we delivered the ACCU, and the client that we used was called Eric, so I don't want you to be confused. His name was Eric, but our client is Tony. But it still demonstrates how you would preface delivering the SDS to a client. Gosh, I hope that all makes sense. So cue to our video, please.
The next section is looking at dependence. Do you know what I mean by dependence, Eric?
Well, it's like your body getting used to it.
Yeah, that's a good description. So the way we think about dependence in the drug and alcohol field is by looking at tolerance and withdrawal.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean by the term tolerance?
Oh, well, it's like your body gets more, needs more the more you use it, because you get used to it.
Yeah, that's right. Can you give me an example of tolerance in relation to your cannabis use?
Oh, well, when I started smoking I needed 1 to feel stoned, but now I need about 3 to 4 to get the same sort of feeling.
Okay, that's right. So when you first started smoking, 1 cone gave you a good high and you felt really great, and now you're needing almost 4 times that in each session to get the same feeling. So how do you think that happened?
Oh, well, I guess my body got used to it, so now I need to smoke more to get that same feeling I had when I started.
That's exactly right. So what you're saying is you need more and more to get the same feeling, and the other way we measure dependence is through withdrawal. Can I explain a little bit about withdrawal?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So the way we look at withdrawal is, if you think about over the last 8 years since you've been using, has there been a time where you've really wanted cannabis, been unable to get it, and started to feel physically uncomfortable?
Well, sort of. A few times. I haven't really been longer than a week without it in the past couple of years, but I feel, you know, I get cold sweats and headaches and just feel really irritable, like I couldn't sit still, and just feel really wound up.
Yeah, right. Well, what you're describing are some of the really common symptoms of withdrawal that we look for when we're talking about dependence. I really just wanted to get an idea of whether you'd experienced dependence, and if so, what level of dependence that you may or may not have experienced.
Okay.
Yeah, so what I've got here is it's a simple scale with 5 questions. It's called the Severity of Dependence Scale. So would it be okay if I asked you some questions to get a better idea of where your current usage sits?
Yeah, sure, why not?
Okay. Are you okay with reading the questions, or would you like me to read them out for you?
Okay, goodbye Eric, and hello Tony. So that was basically just to demonstrate how you might preface delivering the SDS to your clients by asking them, do you know what I mean by dependence, and so on. Okie dokie, so let's move on. After a discussion of dependence and placing Tony's use in respect of the rest of the population, you will then administer the SDS, and this is what his SDS looked like. He scored 8.5, and there are sometimes questions that they don't quite understand or don't quite fit, but that's okay. But it's 8.5. And then after you do the SDS, you don't feed it back right then and there. You'll ask him to fill out the CPQ, and again, this is his CPQ filled out, as well as the HRC. Now, these are critical in terms of developing the intervention, and these are really cornerstones of where the work is, because they give you a lot of information that you now need to work with. You use the CPQ to identify problem areas for him, and you will use the HRC to look at or choose 1 or 2 areas that you might want to work towards in order for him to, hang on, I've just moved on too quickly, in order for him to kind of develop some strategies when he gets into those situations. And as I've already said, these can be downloaded off our website for you to use anytime you like, and not necessarily as a part of the Quitting Cannabis 1 to 6 sessions. Now, when, again, I don't like to be prescriptive, you can choose to give the clients these questionnaires to fill out whenever you feel it necessary. you might want to give it to them as soon as you meet them and get them to bring them back. Or you might get them to fill it out within your session. Or you might get them to fill it out as homework and then bring them back. All I'm suggesting is that these 3 questionnaires need to be filled out. Obviously, the SDS, I think, should be filled out, with you, because, you might want to interpret it during that first session when you have that discussion about dependence. But the other 2, you might set as homework. But see how you go, see how it feels, and whatever feels comfortable for you and for them, you do. So what you need to do after that, the next thing to be discussed is the quitting or reduction date. And as I said, it's really important to try and get a level of commitment. If not this week, then get them to say, okay, you need to think about it this week, and then next week come with a date that we need to work towards, because it's really important for us to work towards a particular date and develop some strategies. So, whether or not he's ready to commit to change, you will find out fairly quickly. And if he isn't, then I guess you need to unravel that a little bit more. Then you have to decide, when you do get a quick date or a change date, how they're going to do this. Are they going to cut down slowly, or are they going to quit cold turkey? Again, that's an important discussion to have, and you need to discuss the pros and the cons of both. And there isn't a right way or a wrong way. Some people feel they just want to stop and go through withdrawal. Other people go, oh no, I couldn't bear it. I've gone through the withdrawal. I can't stand it. Is there another way? And there is a way to alleviate some of the symptoms of withdrawal by cutting down gradually. So as far as Tony's concerned, he's decided on a change date, and he's decided that he's going to reduce over the next 10 days in order to alleviate some of the withdrawal symptoms. So this is what, I guess, he and I, let's just pretend it's me, he and I have decided. Okay, so normally he smokes twice a day. He smokes on arriving home and before bed. So you've got 10 days to cut down, and so you might want to do this with some patches like nicotine. And again, I just want to highlight something that people may not have front of mind, that tobacco plays an important part when people mull up with tobacco in terms of their cannabis use, because nicotine is the most addictive substance. And so people have to understand that when they cut down, they're also cutting down their nicotine. So they've got to be mindful of that. So maybe some nicotine patches, depending obviously on how much they smoke and how much they mull up with tobacco, and whether or not they smoke cigarettes on top of that. That's a very important discussion that needs to be had. And so patches might be the way to go. So if he smokes twice a day, then my suggestion would be for him to reduce days 1, 2, and 3, to reduce by a third times 3 days. So what he might then do is mull up with more tobacco. So this is just to make things easy. But all I want to stress is reduce by a third, okay, over a week. So if there's a reduction of a third by a week, or a little bit less than a week to make it a little bit harder or make the time go a little bit more quickly, then that would be the suggestion. So in his case, day 1, 2, and 3 needs to be cutting down his cannabis by a third before he goes to bed, and just mull up with a little bit more tobacco. That would be the suggestion for me to give to him. And then on days 4, 5, and 6, reduce again by a third over 4 days. So it's 1 cannabis to 2 tobacco. And again, that needs to be negotiated depending on whether he smokes cigarettes on top of that, the fact that he needs to buy patches, and then, reduce his nicotine intake and so on. So that is a discussion. But if he's concerned about the withdrawals from cannabis, then this is the way to go, and then you wean them off the nicotine dependence as well, if that's something that he wants to do. So as I said, days 4, 5, and 6, 7, reduce again by a third, 1 cannabis to tobacco. And then days 8, 9, and 10, reduce again, only smoking once a day this time instead of twice a day. But again, this is negotiated. This is not a hard and fast rule. But this is what I've kind of negotiated with Tony, so that by that date, he's no longer smoking and he jumps off altogether. Again, it's just a suggestion. But all I want you to remember is the easiest way to avoid very bad withdrawal is to cut down over a third a week. And again, without knowing how much a person smokes. So if a person smokes 30 cones a day, then, you know, that's another discussion and another way of reduction altogether. So just bear that in mind. There isn't a recipe for that just covers everyone. So, but the most important thing is to commit to this during the first session. But they shouldn't feel coerced. But you need something to work towards. So you might wish to summarize everything that you've covered with Tony during this session. And I'll just go through this with you again. You should introduce the booklet to them, go through the various sections and what each one of them means. That's embedded in those particular sections of the book that, you know, you're asking them to read, and that they may have to do a little bit of homework, that this is a collaborative exercise, and, you know, they need to tell you, you know, if they're not comfortable with something, or negotiate the date, or negotiate, you know, how they're going to cut down or quit, and so on. Explain what CBT is and how it works to change behaviour, in terms of changing a mindset that then in turn changes the behaviour. Discuss dependence and what that means. Feedback their SDS score. I can't remember whether I actually mentioned that or not, but while I've got it, while I'm onto it, let's just say 8.5 was his score. You would then ask him the question, so Tony, you scored 8.5. 3 is the cutoff. It means that anyone that scores 3 or more is deemed to be dependent according to this validated measure, and the maximum score is 15. You scored 8.5. What do you think that means to you? How do you interpret that score? And it's really an important question to ask. It's not about telling them, yes, you scored 8.5, that means you're dependent. It's more important than that. It's for you to find out their perception. What do they think that score means? You know, are they going to kind of go, oh my God, you know, I'm dependent, I'm never going to get over this, or no, that's not such a bad score, I can. And you need to put a positive spin on it if you can. That's not bad, Tony. You know, it means that there's some wriggle room there for you. You're not 15, so that's great. You know, you're not 5, but you're not 15 either. So, you know, again, it's about let's try not to get to that 15 mark. And this is why you're here, and this is why you're doing this, and this is fantastic, and so on. So all I want to highlight really is when it comes to interpreting that score, you want to hear what they think. So sorry if I didn't explain that at the time. But so you discuss dependence, and then you look at a quit or reduction date if you can. And if not this week, then certainly next week. You administer the 3 questionnaires, and as it says there, you feedback the score and you discuss what that score means. You give homework, which is read the first couple of pages, or perhaps suggest looking onto the ncpic website, recommend buying a book that talks about cannabis. There is one that should be on bookshelves, or you can order. It's called Quitting Cannabis. And it absolutely mirrors everything that we know in terms of evidence-based treatment. Perhaps fill out a few things in the workbook. Look at the pros and cons of smoking, for example, that's in the workbook. So there are various homework things that Tony can do between now and the next time you see him.